All right. Hello, and welcome back to the Thought Cloud podcast. Our goal with this conversation is to uncover a hidden gem that can inspire others along their academic journey. Our guest today is Sasha Newman-Oktan. Sasha is a junior at Columbia studying cognitive science, where she is currently the vice president of the Columbia Neuroscience Society, which is an interdisciplinary community of undergraduates who are interested in exploring the frontiers of neuroscience at Columbia University. She is also a trained professional classical and contemporary ballet dancer. So we are going to dig into Sasha's path. We're going to see exactly what led her in this direction and where she hopes to go ultimately. So, Sasha, thank you so much for coming on today.
No, thank you for having me.
Super excited to jump into it. So, tell us about all things neuroscience after we talk about this idea of ballet, because I think that's an interesting concept here. They're two different sides of the spectrum, art and science, but again, I'm sure they complement each other in so many ways. So, how did you get into ballet?
So I got into ballet. I was really young. I was about three, actually. And my parents were reading me a book, and there was a ballerina in the book. And I sort of pointed to her and went, I want to do that. And so, as soon as I said that, I was taking classes. It started to become more serious. And then I realized, oh, this is something that I'm going to be doing for the foreseeable future, at least.
Wow, wow, wow. And so, what is it like to become a professional ballet dancer? Like, how does that process unfold?
So when I was 16, I was starting to do a couple competitions, and in the ballet world, there are some major competitions: Youth American Grand Prix, um, Prix de Lausanne, and so I did a YAGP Youth American Grand Prix competition. And while I was there, was I while I was there, I did an audition for a summer program, and I got into the summer program. I then was accepted. I was actually the first Canadian accepted into the school to study at the Bolshoi in Moscow. And so I packed my bags, moved to Moscow, and sort of started this journey, and spent a year in Moscow before moving to New York. And it was actually kind of interesting because the Bolshoi in Moscow is like one of the most classical institutions in the world, and it was there that I started to fall in love with contemporary dance.
Hmm.
And so when I moved to New York, I decided I was wanting to pursue and sort of explore the contemporary side of dance a little bit more. And so I just picked up from there and was dancing in the city.
Oh my goodness. And so, for my naivety, when you have ballet and then you have contemporary, is contemporary a subset of ballet or is it a completely different form of dance?
So in ballet, it's a little bit more rigid. I mean, everything has a name, and the stories are a little bit more historically relevant to the past. And so in contemporary, the idea is like to sort of break these molds that ballet has created while using some of the same, language. And I'm putting language in air quotes because it's really about like technique and movement. And so it's it's as if you're writing an academic paper, and the academic paper is uh, the classical ballet, and then an elaborate example or sort of like poetry inside of that academic paper is where the contemporary starts to get a little bit interesting.
Very cool. Very, very cool. And so you went to Moscow, you went, and then you came to New York. Were you in college before this had happened?
No, I was 18. I graduated high school a year early, and so during that sort of final year of high school, I was in Moscow, and then right after that, I moved to the city, and so it was the year where everyone is like starting to go to college. I was dancing in New York.
Wow, 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 wow. So you hadn't entered college yet, and you spent a year doing that?
I did. I spent a year in Russia, and then I moved to New York, and then in New York I continued dancing and wasn't really in college at all yet. I later, a couple years ago, I started taking a few classes, and that's sort of what sparked my pursuing a full-time college experience.
Very nice. So before we jump into the college experience, what were your thoughts before you said you took a couple of classes? Were you ever planning to go to college? Was it just something that, oh, maybe? Or what were your ideas there?
So yeah, it's an interesting question, and for me, because I was always wanting to go to school, and this idea that sort of permeated for me was that school would always be there, but ballet was something that I would have to do, now, which then. And um, so I going and pursuing dance was sometimes felt like I was missing out on going to school, and I always wanted to go to school. But like I said, dance was then, and so I decided to go to school a little bit later in a sort of delayed fashion.
That. No, I love that. And so dance, is it in the picture now? Do you still continue in any way?
I'm not currently performing, but I do try to take classes and have been trying to find the balance between making time for dance, and also with such a busy schedule with school it can be a little difficult, but I'm still dancing.
I love that. I love that. I love that. Well, let's switch gears now and let's get to when you entered college. So you took a couple of classes to get you sort of give you the taste of, okay, maybe this is what I want to jump into now. When was that decision made and what classes were those?
So actually, when I applied for Columbia, um, I had to sort of pseudo declare a major. I had to tell them what I was really interested and focused on studying, and at that time it was the neuroscience and behavior. And so I started on that path, started taking some classes, and realized that I was really interested in some of these philosophical questions, as well as like some areas of economics and computer science that I just wasn't able to take with the neuroscience and behavior major because it was so biology focused, which I loved, but cognitive science came into the picture uh, because it was actually recently declared or established as a major to take. So that was right when I had to do my official declaration. And so everything sort of fell into place.
That's perfect. That is so perfect. So Columbia, you were obviously in New York, but why did you choose Columbia? What was the idea there?
Well, Colombia was always on my radar for, I think, some obvious reasons, but also I'm from Toronto. So New York was always an hour flight away. I spent a lot of summers in the city dancing, and um, they had some really interesting programs that I thought would suit my needs. They had the core curriculum, which I thought was really important in sort of branching out and having access to like a very uh, elaborate but interesting um, liberal arts education. And so Columbia was always on my radar. I also applied to a couple schools in the UK and in Canada, but I wasn't ready to leave New York. So when I got accepted to Columbia, I was really deciding between St. Andrews in the UK and Columbia, and I picked Columbia.
Love that. I love that. I love that. So the cognitive science at Columbia that was just sort of introduced right about the time you were declaring your major. And you liked that because it had more of the it could help you ask the questions about the philosophical things you were curious about. So was that jump a difficult jump from starting as a neuroscience and behavior major to this cognitive science major? What was that process like?
It really wasn't. Cognitive science takes so much from neuroscience and psychology. So it was kind of, I was already taking some computer science, and the cognitive science classes, there was a lot of overlap. What interests me a lot about cognitive science is sort of this decision making and decision architecture. And that's where I wanted to go with some of the thinking and decision making and the brain and the mind. And that's what allowed me to get into it with cognitive science.
Definitely, definitely, definitely. And so those questions, I guess that's kind of what's now driving you in this direction, right? Is these questions that you feel like I need answers to. What are those questions? Like, what are some things that really get your gears turning?
Uh, well, I'm really interested in psychology surrogation, which is when we use other people's experiences and decisions to predict our own. And so evidence of this is pervasive. We see this when we're picking a restaurant on Yelp and you're picking based on reviews and what other people are saying. And I'm interested in how is that affecting our personal decision making, and what are the boundaries? At what point are we no longer making decisions for ourselves and relying on other people's experiences or relying on other decisions to be made for us? And I think with the more technology that we use, while we are simplifying some tasks that would otherwise be maybe cognitively overwhelming or demanding, I'm interested in what are the decisions we are purely continuing to make for ourselves now.
Right. And where do you think that stems from? Like that question, was there like a concern of something ultimately, or just a pure curiosity? Where do you think that all came from?
It's hard to say. I've always been interested in like the brain and the mind. And while I was dancing, I started listening to some podcasts like Hidden Brain with Shankar Vedantam and reading some books, Richard Thaler, Daniel Kahneman, Amos Tversky, and started reading all of these decision making, sort of behavioral economics books. And these questions kept coming up for me where how is technology affecting all of these things? And so that's what I'm really interested in. I took a really interesting class as well, thinking and decision making. And that was just, it opened up this sort of door for me of, how are we making decisions under pressure? How does our decision making change? When are we making decisions based on emotion? When are we not? When are we making them based on rules that we have in our heads? So that's really where these questions have come up from. I think it's always been there. I think there's always been a curiosity. But I definitely think that every day it develops.
Definitely, definitely, definitely. It's so interesting too because you think of college and like that's a very social sphere where people are making decisions um, to sort of create a trajectory on their life, and they're surrounded by so many friends and so many conflicting ideas. And why do you choose that path in particular? It's an interesting concept. Very neat that you're able to study sort of that framework that not only applies to college but so many other things. Where do you hope to go with it? What are your aspirations in terms of looking to understand these questions more?
I'm interested in really the intersection between cognitive science, neuroscience, academia, really, and business. And so it's become evident for me while at school how significant cognitive science is to like a myriad of fields. And so I think while these fields progress and while artificial intelligence starts to gain a spotlight in what people are talking about, I think it remains really crucial and really important for us to think about neuro rights and what privacy is and what that means as all of these fields sort of progress. And so I'm drawn to academia and business. It's hard to say where it ends up because I feel like the question I ask myself every day and it changes. The answer depends on the day. So
That I love that. I love that. Well, Now, CNS, Columbia Neuroscience Society, this is an organization that you're a part of.
I joined as an organization committee member, and I'm now the vice president. Um, but I haven't been there too long, but I guess in the scheme of college, it's been a while since I joined college,
Definitely.
essentially.
Definitely. And so joining as a committee member, I don't know of many clubs that once you join, you can take an active role of such. Was this club smaller when you joined it, or how did you get yourself into that position?
Uh, well, they had an advertisement in one of my neuroscience classes, and I mean, advertisement is a loose term. It was really a slide that they had asked the professor to post in their slide deck. And it was telling us about an event. And so I showed up to the event and I had a really nice time. It was so amazing to be around so many other people that were interested in neuroscience and maybe came from different backgrounds as well. And and so I joined with the intention of wanting to be a part of that and playing a role in what events we put on. I had so many ideas just from going to the one meeting that I was excited and sort of eager to continue.
Definitely, definitely, definitely. So 2.5 years now, and you are the vice president. What have you seen this club? How have you seen this club evolve from your early days to what it is now as you're, a big, instrumental part of its direction and growth?
I think that we are really prioritizing uh, bonding as a group a lot more and laying the path so that future members can join without uh, issues. And so sometimes it's hard when they sort of, quote, power turnover happens in a club because obviously people graduate. And there are a lot of things that you need to keep track of, like did we apply for certain grants and making sure that everything is organized. And so what we've seen is that sometimes these questions, sometimes these things sort of get left behind and you need to keep track of them so that the next person that comes in knows what they're dealing with. And so I think that and trying to continue to find time and ways to bond with other members is really important. And that's what our priority has been because it's so easy to, just put on events and they're really interesting, but ultimately you want to bond with these people as well.
Definitely, definitely. I love that actually. I think that's huge because, it isn't just so transactional. Any good group requires, that emotional support as well, that community feel. So I love that. And being a part of this organization, being a part of this community, how do you feel that you have benefited in your direction ultimately?
I think it reinforced my interest in neuroscience topics. I think it's always beneficial to be surrounded by like-minded individuals, and I think it's really special to be putting on events that increase exposure to neuroscience to people that may not otherwise have access in either their classes or in the community at large. So that's been a really integral part of my experience.
Definitely, definitely, definitely. And in the sense of other individuals, how do you think that it's positively impacted them and all of their quests?
In being part of the organization, in being part of CNS, ah, that's tough. I think it's kind of similar. I think it's just being around other individuals who, we come to these meetings and we have ideas of putting on other events, how to grow our outreach groups, mentorship, mentoring with other individuals, upperclassmen and lowerclassmen getting together, other institutions within the Columbia network as well, like with the medical center and with the Mind and Brain Institute, and just trying to create these networks of people so that your experience isn't as overwhelming as an undergraduate student. And so I think that is always at the forefront and one of the most exciting things about joining a club during school.
Definitely, definitely, definitely. Well, we're gonna take a quick little break here and we'll come right back into it. How does that sound?
That sounds good.
All right, so we are back. We were just talking about the Columbia Neuroscience Society, everything that it has offered Sasha and all of her peers that belong, the importance of community, the importance of network, really taking all of the stress and things that make a student overwhelmed in their experience a little bit less and a little bit more in directional. How about that? So, Sasha, now that we have chatted about everything of sorts, what do you hope to do after college with this track, with this direction? Where do you think that you might end up?
This is a tough question for me for a few reasons. One is that every day it's looking like grad school is going to be inevitable, which is a little bit daunting. I think that there's just so much that I want to learn and dabble with and dabble in that I don't know if I'll go into grad school right after undergrad. Um, but ask me again next week and I might have a different answer. So overall, I think, like I was saying before, industry wise, it's definitely the intersection of academia and business. Somehow, however that works for me, is where I see myself most realistically. But then, I've also developed through a couple neuroscience classes a fascination with like olfactory neuroscience and potential applications of like wine and perfume industries to neuroscience research. So there's all of these overlapping interests where technology, neuro, business are all sort of coming together in different ways, and that's presenting itself in different ways for me every day.
Love that. That's awesome. Well, I hope that I know you'll find something that you definitely want to set your sights on, and I'm sure it won't be the last thing. But I'm curious, when you say academia meets business, do you mean specifically around the idea that you are performing some sort of research that is complementary to that business objective? Is that sort of what you're describing there? Like you said with the perfume and the wine?
I think more along the ways of, we have for the perfume and wine, for example, these are fields that have been established for a really long time. And so I think that there are ways we can learn how to study olfaction, drawing from these fields. And so that would be a business application in an academic setting where we're learning from these business sectors that have been around for so long. And there may be, some things that you miss in research, you miss while just working in a lab that you might otherwise be able to gain something that works towards you from these fields.
Definitely, definitely, definitely. I think that's super fascinating. I love the mystery of the field that you work into. I think that there's always like another sort of perspective to look at it from, and the brain is obviously so complicated. We've yet to figure out so much about it, which you know. So very neat. Well, I'm excited to see where your path takes you, and obviously next week I'll ask you and see what what that looks. But well, wonderful. We're gonna go into the rapid fire round now and close it out. So I'll kick it off. But the first question is, what is the most stressful part of being a student day in and day out?
For me, it's time and readings. Sometimes it feels like there aren't enough hours in the day to get through all the readings you have when you're getting 50-page plus readings from 4 or 5 different classes. That can be a little bit overwhelming. But it's also, I think, important to, cut yourself off and let yourself relax. There's no way you can absorb everything all at once. You need to take a bit of a break and not be go, go, go 24/7.
Definitely, definitely, definitely. What would you say the most meaningful way for students to help each other is?
Ask each other. I mean, there's nothing better than helping someone understand a concept that you also struggled with, that you now, have gained an understanding of. I'm not a huge fan of academic competition, and I think we're all there to help each other.
Definitely. I love that. I really love that. Okay, next question. What is your biggest hope to accomplish during your time on Earth?
I never want to stop growing and learning things. I want to be a joyful and compassionate, kind person. And I think especially coming from another career that I was so passionate about, like ballet, I think it really critical for me to work in something that is meaningful so that I can live an authentic life where I'm learning constantly.
Definitely. What would you say your top piece of advice is for those who are early in their educational journey?
I love this question. And my go-to answer for this is go to office hours. Go to office hours. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions in class. You're there to learn. And if you don't understand something, don't leave office hours until it's explained to you in a way that you actually can walk out feeling like, okay, now I got this.
Love that. It's actually true too, because it's sometimes scary to go and ask that question to the teacher. It shouldn't be though. So great advice. Love that. Okay, well, Sasha, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people follow your work, what you're doing, and keep up with everything that you are up to?
Some of my academic stuff is on LinkedIn, so I'm happy for people to follow through that. And otherwise, I have a somewhat inactive Instagram, but I'm starting to use it a little bit more. So I'm happy to have people have access to my Instagram as well.
Go give her a follow on those and keep up with everything she has been up to. Sasha, it's been a pleasure speaking with you, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.